Welcome back, everyone. We're diving into something really fascinating today. Food production and agriculture. Specifically, how biotechnology is shaping what we eat. We've got this source, sup3.txt, and it makes a really interesting point that we're going to dig into.
Okay.
Agriculture, it argues, has always been about biotechnology, going back thousands of years.
Right.
Not just a modern thing.
Yeah.
So let's unpack that a bit.
Well, the book uses corn as a prime example.
Okay.
What we often think of as like natural corn is actually the result of 9,000 years of selective breeding.
Yeah.
You know, indigenous peoples in Mexico, they took this wild grass, teosinte, tiny cobs, and they transformed it over generations into the large, robust corn that, we know and love today.
So they were essentially doing genetic modification.
Exactly, just without the fancy lab equipment we have now.
Right.
And the book actually argues that the difference between that teosinte and modern corn is way bigger than the difference between like GMO and non-GMO corn today. So it really challenges our assumptions about what's natural versus, modified.
It's a good point. Like what we consider natural is often already heavily influenced by human intervention.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so then the book jumps into the 20th century, the industrial agriculture revolution. You've got tractors, synthetic fertilizers, pesticides, all these innovations that led to massive increases in food production.
Yeah.
But of course, there was a downside.
Right. Oh, absolutely. The environmental costs were significant. Pollution, soil degradation.
Yeah.
Water depletion. We even see it today. Borlaug saved millions from starvation with his work in Mexico, developing those high-yield crops like IR8 rice. But even that success story, it had its limitations. The benefits didn't fully reach Africa. And now, with the global population headed towards like 10.4 billion by 2080.
Right.
Scaling up those practices, it's just not a sustainable option.
We need a different approach.
Right.
So what's the alternative? What does the book propose?
Well, it points to the era of what's called molecular agriculture.
Okay.
Where we're using AI, genomic sequencing, and this thing called marker-assisted breeding to develop, better crops and faster.
Oh, interesting. So like speeding up the process.
Yeah, drastically. For example, it took like over 6 years to develop that IR8 rice. But using this marker-assisted breeding, scientists were able to create a new flood-resistant rice variety in under 3 years.
Wow, that's a huge difference.
Yeah.
And this kind of technology, could that also be a key to addressing some of the limitations of like relying solely on organic farming?
Absolutely. I mean, organic methods are valuable, but it's unlikely they can meet the demands of, a growing population on their own.
Right.
We need that multifaceted approach. And that includes molecular agriculture. And, within that field, gene editing holds incredible potential.
You're talking about CRISPR and things like that.
Yeah, CRISPR, exactly.
I've been hearing so much about that.
CRISPR and other gene editing tools, they allow scientists to make these really precise modifications to crops.
So it's much more targeted than traditional methods.
Much more.
Okay.
We're seeing, disease-resistant rice, wheat, cassava.
Wow.
They're even working on salt-tolerant rice, heat and drought-tolerant crops.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah, even crops with enhanced nutritional content like, low-gluten wheat.
So much potential there. Let's talk about golden rice.
Okay.
That's a GMO success story.
Yeah.
But I know it's been pretty controversial, too.
It has, yeah. Golden rice is a really great example of how gene editing can be used to target specific nutritional deficiencies.
Right.
It was developed to combat vitamin A deficiency, which is a major cause of preventable blindness and death in children, especially in developing countries.
Right.
And, by engineering rice to produce beta-carotene, which our bodies convert to vitamin A, it offers a really powerful solution.
But it's faced a lot of resistance from anti-GMO groups, right?
It has, yeah. And despite, its potential to save lives.
It's a really interesting case study in how fear and misinformation can hinder the adoption of, potentially life-saving technologies.
It really is. Makes you think about how we can bridge that gap between, the science and public perception.
That's a crucial question.
Yeah.
So golden rice is just one example of what gene editing can do.
Right.
The book also mentions some other pretty fascinating applications.
Yeah, there are a lot.
What are some of the ones that stood out to you?
Well, one that really stands out is the C4 rice project.
Okay.
It's this ambitious attempt to convert C3 crops, like rice, into more efficient C4 plants, like corn.
Okay.
And, if they succeed, we could see significant increases in yields and reduced reliance on resources like water and fertilizer.
I'm not super familiar with C4 photosynthesis. Right.
Can you explain why that would be so beneficial? Why convert rice to C4?
Sure. Well, C4 plants, they're just way more efficient at converting sunlight into energy.
Oh, I see.
They can thrive in hotter, drier conditions.
Okay.
And they require less water and nutrients.
So it makes them more resilient.
Exactly. And if we can make rice a C4 plant, oh, man, it could be a game changer, especially for regions facing, climate change.
So not only would it increase yields, but it could also make rice more adaptable to climate change.
Exactly.
That's incredible. And it's not just about, improving yields and resilience.
Right.
Gene editing is being used to enhance growth.
Yes.
And reduce the need for fertilizers in other ways as well, right?
Yeah, by targeting specific genes that are involved in plant growth and nutrient uptake.
Okay.
They edited this gene called OSDREB1C in rice and saw yields boosted by over 2/3.
Really surprising. Yeah, it's really cool. This approach could significantly reduce our reliance on fertilizers, which, as we talked about before, have significant environmental impacts.
Absolutely. Those are some impressive results. It seems like we're on the cusp of, this whole new era in agriculture. But the book, it doesn't just focus on plant genetics.
It doesn't, no.
It also talks about the microbiome revolution. This whole focus on the microbial communities living in and around plants.
Yeah, the plant microbiome. It's essential for plant health. It aids in growth, nutrient absorption, even disease resistance.
Okay, so the microbes that interact with the plant are super important.
They're really important. Yeah.
Interesting. So how are scientists trying to manipulate the microbiome to benefit crops?
Well, they're taking what they call a top-down and a bottom-up approach.
A top-down and a bottom-up.
Yeah.
Okay, what does that involve? Can you explain those approaches?
So the top-down approach, it involves stressing plants in controlled environments to identify those, beneficial microbes that help them survive.
Okay, so it's like finding the plant's best microbial allies in the face of, disease or stress.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Interesting. What about the bottom-up?
So the bottom-up approach focuses on creating synthetic microbial communities, or syncoms.
Syncoms, okay.
And they do this to target specific benefits. It's like engineering bacteria to produce fungicides or to fix nitrogen.
Wow. So, building a customized microbiome for the plant?
Pretty much, yeah.
Fascinating. It seems like manipulating the plant microbiome could have big implications for land use as well, right?
Absolutely. If we can enhance nutrient uptake and disease resistance, we can potentially, reduce the need for fertilizers and pesticides, lessen our impact on the environment, and reduce the need to expand farmland.
Right, which is huge.
Yeah.
Speaking of land use, the book also suggests that, reducing our reliance on animal products could free up vast amounts of land that's currently used for feed crops.
For sure, yeah. We need to rethink, fundamentally, how we're using land if we want to feed the world sustainably.
Absolutely. Okay, now let's address the elephant in the room. GMO safety.
Okay.
This is a topic that often generates a lot of fear and misinformation.
Yeah, it's true. But decades of research have consistently shown that GMOs are safe for human consumption.
Right.
I mean, major scientific organizations, like the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine, they've all concluded that there's no evidence to suggest that GMOs are any less safe than conventional crops.
And yet there's this huge disconnect between public perception and the scientific consensus on GMO safety. Why do you think that is? What are some of the reasons for this disconnect?
Well, I think there are a few reasons. Firstly, people have legitimate concerns about corporate control of our food supply.
Yeah.
And the potential environmental risks associated with some GMOs, especially, the ones engineered for herbicide resistance.
People worry about the power of big ag companies and the potential for unintended consequences, and that's understandable.
Absolutely. And then there's also been, this failure to effectively communicate the benefits and risks of GMOs to the public.
Yeah.
The conversation has become so polarized with a lot of misinformation, especially online.
It's frustrating to see ideology trumping science, especially when the stakes are so high.
Yeah, it really is. And then, that leads us to the third reason, which is misinformation campaigns by, anti-GMO activists.
The book specifically mentioned Greenpeace's opposition to golden rice, despite its potential to save lives.
Yeah, and that controversy really underscores how hard it is to overcome fear and misinformation, even when a technology offers these really clear humanitarian benefits.
Yeah.
So how do we bridge that gap between science and public perception?
Yeah, it's a complex issue.
Very complex, and there's no easy solution. What's important is that we have, an open and honest conversation about GMOs based on science and evidence.
Right.
And not, fear-mongering.
Absolutely. Speaking of complex, regulation and policy surrounding GMOs are kind of a patchwork globally, aren't they?
Oh, yeah. It definitely varies around the world. The U.S., they distinguish between transgenic GMOs and gene-edited crops, while Europe has historically taken a much stricter approach, although that's starting to change.
Okay.
And then you have China, who's investing heavily in agricultural biotechnology, aiming to become, a dominant player in the GMO market.
That's interesting. So it seems like we're at this turning point, right?
We really are.
The technology is rapidly advancing, but public acceptance is lagging behind.
Yeah.
I mean, we're seeing some positive signs. The European Union is starting to relax its regulations on gene editing. Countries like Kenya are considering lifting their bans on GMOs.
That's hopeful.
But there's still a long way to go, right?
Yeah.
We need to address public concerns, ensure responsible development, and foster a more nuanced understanding of the potential benefits and risks of this technology.
Absolutely. If we can do all that, biotechnology has the potential to be this, vital tool for creating a more sustainable and equitable food system.
Definitely a topic that deserves a deeper dive. Speaking of deep dives, let's shift our focus to the future of biotech food specifically.
Okay.
This is where things get really interesting because we're starting to see applications that go beyond simply modifying crops.
Right.
We're talking about creating entirely new foods.
Yes.
And that's what we're going to dig into in the next part.
Awesome. I'm excited for that. We're seeing this really fascinating convergence of biotechnology, food science, and even, culinary arts.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Think about it. If we can modify the genes of plants, why not engineer entirely new foods at, the cellular level?
Okay. I'm intrigued. What are we talking about here?
Yeah.
Is this lab-grown meat?
Yeah. Lab-grown meat.
Okay.
Sometimes called, cultured meat or cultivated meat.
Right. I've been hearing a lot about that.
It's a prime example of this, new wave of biotech foods.
Okay.
So scientists take a small sample of animal cells.
Okay.
And they grow them in this nutrient-rich environment, And it essentially replicates, the natural process of muscle growth in animals, but without the whole animal, right?
So you're growing meat without needing to raise and slaughter animals.
Exactly.
That's pretty radical.
It is pretty radical, and it has the potential to, completely revolutionize the food industry. Just think about the ethical implications.
Yep.
We could produce meat without factory farms.
Right.
Significantly reduce animal suffering.
Yeah, and I imagine there's some major environmental benefits too, right? Because animal agriculture, it contributes significantly to, greenhouse gas emissions, deforestation, water pollution.
Huge. Yeah, all of that. And lab-grown meat could, drastically reduce that environmental footprint of meat production.
Yeah.
It's still early days.
Sure.
But there are a bunch of companies that are working on bringing cultured meat to market.
Really?
They're developing everything from, beef and chicken to fish, even exotic meats.
Okay, but how does it taste? Can lab-grown meat really compete with the real thing?
That's the million-dollar question, right? And the answer is, it's getting there. The early versions, they were often described as, bland or having a different texture.
Yeah, right.
But these companies are making huge strides in, replicating that taste and mouthfeel of traditional meat. They're experimenting with different cell lines, different growth mediums, even adding, plant-based fats to enhance the flavor.
So they're really refining it.
Oh, yeah.
Interesting. But it seems like getting people on board with the idea might be the biggest hurdle. Can you really blame people for being, a little squeamish about eating something grown in a lab?
I get it. There's definitely a yuck factor for some people.
Yeah.
But, I think as the technology improves and the products become more available, we'll see attitudes shift. I mean, remember, people were once skeptical about, like, microwaves and genetically modified crops, and now those are just, everyday things.
That's a good point. It makes you wonder what other kinds of biotech foods might be on the horizon. Like, what else are scientists cooking up, so to speak?
Well, I mean, if we can grow meat in a lab, why not other animal products, right?
Right.
So companies are developing cultured milk, eggs, even leather, all without involving animals.
So we can have all the benefits of these animal products without the ethical and environmental downsides.
Exactly, yeah.
That's pretty mind-blowing.
It is. And it raises some really important questions about, the future of food and agriculture. Like, will traditional farming become obsolete?
Right.
What are the economic implications for, farmers and ranchers? How do we regulate these new foods?
Yeah.
These are all questions that, we need to start grappling with now.
Yeah, for sure. And it's not just about, meat and animal products either. Scientists are also using biotechnology to, improve the nutritional content of existing foods, right?
Oh, yeah. They're working on developing crops that are richer in vitamins, minerals, antioxidants.
So we could potentially create foods that are even healthier and more nutritious than what we have now.
Exactly. Imagine, a world where a simple bowl of rice could provide all the essential nutrients a person needs.
Wow. That could transform, communities facing food insecurity and malnutrition.
Absolutely.
Could also help address some of the health challenges we see associated with modern diets, which are often high in processed foods and low in essential nutrients.
Exactly. Yeah, it's kind of like this potential solution for both world hunger and diet-related diseases.
So we've talked about lab-grown meat, cultured animal products, nutritionally enhanced crops.
Mm-hmm.
What other innovations are on the horizon in this world of biotech foods? What else is out there?
Well, one really exciting development is this emergence of personalized nutrition.
Personalized nutrition.
Yeah. Scientists are developing ways to tailor food to an individual's specific genetic makeup and dietary needs.
Wait, are we talking about custom designed meals based on your DNA?
Yeah, pretty much.
That sounds like science fiction.
I know, right? It might sound futuristic, but it's becoming a reality.
Wow.
There are companies out there that are already offering personalized nutrition services. They analyze your genes, your gut microbiome, your lifestyle factors, all to create, customized meal plans and supplement recommendations.
So by understanding your unique biology, you can, optimize your diet for better health and well-being.
Exactly. Yeah, personalized nutrition could help people manage their weight, prevent chronic diseases, even improve athletic performance. It's like this whole new frontier in food and healthcare.
After doing this deep dive, I'm starting to realize that the future of food is going to look radically different from what we're used to. I mean, it's exciting, but I have to admit, it's also a little intimidating.
Yeah, it's definitely a time of rapid change and innovation.
Yeah.
But it's important to remember that, technology is just a tool. It's up to us to decide how we use it and what kind of food future we want to create.
That's a good point.
Mm-hmm.
It's easy to get caught up in all the amazing possibilities.
Yeah.
And forget that we have choices to make. With all this talk about innovation and technology, I can't help but wonder about the role of, traditional food cultures and culinary traditions. Will those be lost in this, brave new world of biotech foods?
That's a really crucial question. And I think the answer is it depends. I mean, there's definitely a risk that, mass-produced lab-grown foods could lead to less diverse diets and erode culinary traditions.
I agree, yeah. Nobody wants to live in a world where everyone's eating the same, bland synthetic food.
Right. But I also see an opportunity to use biotechnology to, preserve and even enhance traditional food cultures. Imagine, recreating lost or endangered ingredients using gene editing.
Oh, wow.
Or, using cultured meat techniques to produce traditional delicacies that are, really difficult or unsustainable to obtain through, conventional methods.
So biotechnology could be a tool for both, innovation and preservation.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance, right, between embracing the potential of new technologies while respecting the, cultural heritage and culinary wisdom of the past.
Okay, I think we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about, the history of biotechnology in agriculture, the challenges of feeding a growing population, the potential of gene editing, and the emergence of, entirely new biotech foods.
That's a lot.
So where does all this leave us? Like, what are the key takeaways for the listener? What do you want people to walk away with?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway is that biotechnology is going to shape the future of food, whether we like it or not. The technology is advancing rapidly, and it has the potential to address some of humanity's biggest challenges, food security, climate change.
Absolutely. But it's important to remember that it's not like this magic bullet.
No.
We need to be thoughtful and deliberate about how we develop and deploy these technologies.
We need to have that open and honest conversation about the potential benefits and risks.
Yeah.
Ensuring that our food future is sustainable, equitable, and of course, delicious.
I couldn't agree more. Now, I realize that this, new food future might seem a bit daunting to some people.
Yeah, it can.
So what are some things we should be watching out for as these technologies develop? What are your concerns?
Well, it's not, all going to be smooth sailing. One of the biggest concerns is the potential for unintended consequences.
Yeah, I can see that.
I mean, we're talking about complex biological systems, right?
Yeah.
It's impossible to predict every outcome, like gene editing, for example.
Mm-hmm.
It could have unforeseen effects on, the environment.
Yeah.
Or even human health.
Right. We don't want to create new problems while trying to solve old ones.
Exactly. It's crucial that we proceed with caution, conduct thorough research and, establish these really robust regulatory frameworks to minimize those risks.
That makes sense. We don't want to repeat the mistakes of the past, rushing technologies to market before we fully understand those long-term impacts.
Exactly. And, another big concern.
What's that?
Access and equity.
Oh, right. Yeah. Will these new biotech foods only be available to, the wealthy?
That's a huge question. We need to make sure that these innovations, they don't exacerbate existing inequalities.
Yeah.
The benefits of biotech foods, they should be available to everyone, regardless of, income or location.
Right. Everyone deserves access to healthy and sustainable food.
Exactly. And this means addressing, affordability, infrastructure, education. If we don't, we risk creating a food system where, the rich have access to all these, healthier, more sustainable options.
Yeah.
And the poor are left behind.
It's like that sci-fi dystopia where, the elite are feasting on lab-grown delicacies and everyone else is stuck with nutrient-deficient gruel.
Exactly.
We definitely want to avoid that.
For sure.
But how can consumers, how can everyday people make informed choices about these new foods?
Right.
And, influence the direction of this whole industry?
Right.
What can we do?
Consumers have a huge role to play. I mean, it starts with education.
Yeah.
We need to understand the science behind these technologies.
Right.
The potential benefits and risks.
Yeah.
The ethical considerations. We should be asking questions.
Yeah.
Demanding transparency from companies.
Yeah.
And supporting policies that, promote responsible innovation.
Right now, it feels like there's so much fear and confusion surrounding biotech foods.
There is, yeah.
How can we move beyond that, hype? And have a more nuanced, evidence-based conversation about these issues?
Well, I think it's crucial to avoid that sensationalism and that fear-mongering.
Yeah.
And engage in these open and respectful dialogues, acknowledge both the potential and the limitations.
Right.
We should be listening to diverse perspectives. Scientists, farmers, consumers, ethicists, everyone. Mm-hmm. And most importantly, base our decisions on solid evidence.
Right. Not just on, like you said, ideology or unfounded fears.
Exactly.
So it sounds like the future of food is not just about, science and technology.
It's not, no.
But also about values, ethics, social responsibility.
Absolutely. We need to decide, what kind of food system we want to create.
Yeah.
Do we want a system that prioritizes profit over people and the planet?
Right.
Or do we want a system that's, sustainable and nourishes both our bodies and our communities?
Big questions.
Big questions, yeah. And these are the questions we need to be asking as we, kind of navigate this uncharted territory.
A lot to think about. I know I'm going to be looking at my plate a little differently after this deep dive.
Me too. And, I think the most important thing is to just stay informed, stay engaged.
Yeah.
And be part of the conversation. I mean, the future of food, it's in our hands.
That's a great point to end on. And on that thought-provoking note, We'll wrap up this deep dive into the future of food and biotechnology. We've covered a lot of ground, from the ancient roots of agricultural biotechnology to the cutting-edge innovations that are shaping what we'll be eating tomorrow. As always, we encourage you to continue exploring this fascinating topic and to consider the implications for your